All right. Hey, welcome to the Cross Points podcast. I am so honored to have a guest with us today who has traveled literally all over the world, has an interesting, fascinating background. Nick Jordan, I am so glad you're on the program. Thank you for
David.
being here with us.
Appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Just a little bit about Nick. If you don't know who Nick is, he has done so many amazing things throughout his life. He spent 20 years in the tourism business here in Overland Park, right?
Right.
Okay. Pastored at Cross Points, Full Faith Church of Love, for a couple of years. He was the interim pastor for a couple of years, did an amazing job. I'm going to probably have you back at some point and talk about that.
Sure.
But we're going to have some other things we're going to talk about. He was also a Kansas senator for 13 years. Let's see what else he did. He was also the Secretary of Revenue for the state of Kansas.
Right.
The CEO, and you're going to have to help me with this. What was this? The CEO?
Governor's Council of Economic Advisors.
Governor's Council of Economic
Advisors.
Advisors.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then also, you were the Secretary of Revenue and Commerce.
Right.
And currently, your most recent position, and I have to read this because I got to get this right. The distinguished, this is the first time we've had a distinguished fellow here
Well,
on
it's the first time
this.
I've been a distinguished fellow, so it's great.
So Nick is the distinguished fellow at Brandmeier Center for Applied Economics at the KU School of Business.
You got it.
Wow.
You got it right. Now, I want to say something. All that sounds wonderful.
Yeah, it's great.
But I did run for Congress once and lost, so I want people to understand.
See, I wasn't going to throw that in there.
You don't always go like this. Sometimes
doesn't always
you have
go
a
to
little bit of a challenge in your life, but that's good.
No, that's
I just
awesome.
want to make sure we got
You
that.
did. Did you have
the
a good time
downside
running
on it.
for Congress? Was
I
that
had,
fun?
we met a lot of great people. Washington, D.C. was extremely supportive of me. Bush came in for me. Cheney came in for me. John Boehner was there a lot.
Wow.
We just had a lot of people rally around us to try to win that one, but it didn't quite work. I saw George W. Bush, by the way. We went down to his office in Dallas.
Did you? Tell me about that experience.
Probably a couple years ago now. Sam Brownback was governor, and that's who I served under in the cabinet. And Sam called me one day, and he said, it was after we went to Israel, which we'll probably talk about.
Right,
but he called me. He says, hey, I'm going to Dallas. I'd like you to go down with me. And I really didn't know at first what it was. And I said, well, sure.
Dallas?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Okay, boss,
fine. I'll go. Whatever you say. Yeah. I'm here for you.
So we flew down to Dallas, and we met with George W. Bush in his office in Dallas, now retired. And part of the reason we went was we wanted to see the Bush Library because they're trying to do some development here in Kansas. They were using that as a pattern. So that's why. But we got to spend time with him in his office.
So tell me, so how was he?
Oh, he's awesome. When he came, I told him that day two things. I thanked him for coming in for me, and he said, did we win? And I said, no. And then I told him, he did the neatest thing, David. When he came in for me in the campaign, you always have a little reception for the big donors before you do the major rally.
Yeah.
And so we were doing that, and before that, he meets the family.
Okay.
And so we had, our grandkids were little kids at that point.
Okay. Because this was what year were we talking about here?
2008.
2008.
So this
is,
12 years ago, and
exactly.
they're teenagers now, so they were pretty young when they did this.
Okay.
And he got down on his knees.
No.
In front of the three kids and talked to the three kids alone for I don't know how long.
Really?
And gave them all a presidential lapel pin.
Oh, my goodness.
That they could keep. And it was just the neatest thing.
Do you have any idea what he said?
No, he's very encouraging because the house we had the fundraiser at, the gentleman's a local businessman, and his son is blind, I think, if I remember right. Mm-hmm. And as Bush was leaving, we stood out in front of the house for I don't know how long talking, and he centered on this blind kid.
Really?
And he made sure he had everything he needed to be able to read and to do what he needed to do in life. And he was willing to help him get stuff. To help him in life. So I just would say that he was just extremely kind.
Mm-hmm. Well, this goes back to his compassionate conservatism,
very,
which
very
is really
much so.
Kind of got hijacked because of 9/11. But wow, that's very interesting.
So we just had a great experience with him, and we had a great experience down in Dallas too. We joked around, kidded around, and he had great. If anybody listening to this or sees this wants to see a great presidential library, that's an awesome presidential library. Oh, it really is.
So, like, what kinds of things did they have in the library? Like, why would someone want to go?
The neatest thing is he's painting now.
Okay. Oh, he's painting.
Yeah, he's
I heard
painted.
Something about this.
They told us he's had 2 or 3 instructors.
Okay.
But he's amazingly good.
Really?
And what he's doing is he's painting wounded warriors that he's actually meeting.
Oh, wow.
So they're portraits.
Okay.
And so the first room they took us into at the museum is his portraits of wounded warriors, wounded veterans from past wars. Really, really cool. Mm-hmm. But it's just some of the memorabilia. Presidential libraries are cool to go to anyway. I know people have been out to Eisenhower. We got Truman here close by us, and they're
I've
neat
never
to see.
been to any of those.
They're cool. They're great. They're great to see. A lot of history, and especially take your kids.
Yeah.
Because they get to learn a good piece about history. Mm-hmm. Truman Library, which I think is cool out in Independence, has a whole section about him making Israel a country.
Right. Oh, yeah. Which
that's tremendous interest to us as Christians in that is, wow, that's cool. And they got a whole section on it. So there's a lot of good history to learn at those kind of places.
Yeah, so if you've ever been to a presidential library, kind of put that in the comments below. I'd love to know what you experienced at a presidential library. Well, so Nick, so tell us, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast is you've led such an interesting life. You've met so many fascinating people. I thought, how cool would it be for our listeners to kind of hear about some of the stories of people that they may be interested in.
Sure.
So one of the stories you were telling me a little bit was you've met some presidents. So you talked about George W. Bush, but you also had Jimmy Carter. So here's a Democrat. You had a Republican, now a Democrat. So tell us about.
I want to say something about Christians and politics. The only reason I got involved in all this, and I think the only reason God put me there was we've got to be salt.
Absolutely.
And we got to be out there standing for God's values. That's right. And I've had good friends. I still have good friends that are Democrats in the state legislature and around, and we're good friends. We debate hard on the floor, but we go out and have a cup of coffee or dinner or lunch together and laugh and have a great time together. So I've always tried to make sure I never built walls with people.
That's good.
Because a lot of us had the same concerns in that. So anyway, back to Jimmy Carter. Mm-hmm. I was working at the Muehlebach Hotel then.
Okay, and Muehlebach Hotel. Okay,
yeah, which is now the Marriott in downtown Kansas City.
All right.
And Radisson had just taken it over. And for some reason, Jimmy Carter came in a couple times, once during the campaign.
Okay.
And for some reason, I always ended up being the one to escort him around the hotel and things he was doing. And so, in fact, your dad was involved in the first one, by the way.
Okay.
He did meet Jimmy Carter, but we had a concerned Christian committee at the time, and we wanted to talk to him about, from a Christian standpoint, since he was a Christian, issues. So anyway, first time he came in, I just helped him up to his room, and he had this big thing when he was running for office, Mr. Blue Collar or whatever. He always carried his own luggage and put his clothes over his shoulder.
He didn't have the huge entourage of people carrying his stuff.
They were there, but they were off a little bit. But he wanted it to look like I'm the working man. I'm for the working man, which was good, and he was.
Sure.
But one interesting story was one Saturday morning I was in my office at the Muehlebach, and I got a call from the White House.
Okay.
And they wanted to do a national press conference in Kansas City, and I had no idea what it took to put on a national press conference at that time. But they wanted one of our ballrooms. And the Muehlebach, if anybody's ever been down there, has huge ballrooms.
Okay.
So I'm thinking, really? For a press conference, we need a big ballroom?
Right.
And they go, yep, we need the ballroom. And because of the entourage, the press, and everybody travels with the president, we're going to probably have to have 100 to 115 rooms. Okay. And they ship everything in, by the way, too. The other thing we talked about is everything comes in from them. The draping for the background, the podium, the staging. Everything
all
comes
of this is
from
Washington,
D.C. Yes. They don't.
So they don't do any local
security-wise. They just everything is their stuff.
Okay, got it.
And they ship in 2 limos so they can trick. You don't know which one he's in, and all the other stuff comes. And so anyway, okay, we go. So I look at our books, and we got a full house convention in over the dates they wanted the national press conference. So I called him back. I called him back, and I said, I don't know if we can do this because we're booked.
Right.
And they go, yeah, you can do it. Call the convention and figure out how to do it. And so I called the convention and I said, look, we got a chance for President Carter to come in and do this national press conference during your convention. Right. We're going to have to move 100 of your rooms off to other hotels.
Oh, my goodness.
And you're going to have to give up the ballroom because they needed it the night before as well as the next day to set up. Okay. You're going to have to give up a ballroom, which is now scheduled for one of your receptions before a dinner. I mean, this was a big convention, several hundred people. So you're going to have to give up that ballroom and 100 rooms for this to happen. And so they went and talked about it, called me back and said, well, maybe we'll do it if we can get this agreement. Okay. If the president will come to our reception or dinner, we'd be probably happy to work with you.
If we can get the president for free.
Yeah. So I called him back real quick and called the White House back, and Secret Service is always involved. I dealt with Secret Service a lot down in the hotel and all this political stuff. But anyway, Secret Service goes, no way.
Right.
He's not going into a reception. He's not even going close to a reception. But we finally worked it out.
Okay.
And they finally agreed. Well, the problem with the reception was now we had to put it in the foyer to get the ballroom.
Oh, my.
And people were shoulder to shoulder. I mean, there was not
everybody wanted
room.
to be there.
Yeah, and there was no elbow room.
Okay.
So Secret Service, again, wasn't very, very happy.
Yeah.
But it all worked out. He went to the reception. He even went into the dinner for a few minutes.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Which they got cha-ching. They got everything they wanted.
Yeah.
But the funny part of the story was the next morning I get a call in my office saying, we need your help. Okay, what do you need before the conference? And they go, do you have any of those old wooden Coke cases? And young people listening to this won't even know what I'm talking about.
Old wooden Coke cases. What are you talking about?
But I used to have wooden Coke cases that bottles were in.
Okay, so the bottles would fit in
the
Coke,
that's
and then
how
you'd
they
be able
delivered
to
them.
carry.
It's like a case of Coke came in these wooden cases.
Right.
And we go, yeah, we do.
Okay.
And they said, could you quickly put one behind the podium? Because they needed Jimmy Carter to look the right height behind the podium.
No way.
So nobody knew anywhere nationally, but now Jimmy Carter was standing on a Coke case that day.
Of all things that they wanted
at a national press conference, right? Yeah, they flew everything in from D.C. except the Coke case. So we had to find a Coke case. So it's fun. It's a fun behind-the-scenes story.
Goodness.
We had a real good time when George W. Bush came in for me for my congressional campaign. The weekend before, they decided to have a cookout. The guy hosting it at his house, have a cookout at his house for everybody involved.
Okay.
Which meant, of course, my campaign crew, but all the Secret Service agents were there.
Okay.
All the president's helicopter pilots.
Sure.
Air Force One pilots were there.
Right.
All the military guys that were going to be there because they had snipers. This house had woods, and so they had snipers out in the woods and everything during our deal. Everybody was there.
So you're talking about a lot of people.
Yeah, it was a
people.
pretty neat cookout.
Yeah, I bet.
And it was so much
people.
fun to set because Secret Service guys, if you get them away from the day they're on duty, they're just cool, good, normal people. And
I bet they have
to
tons
sit
of stories
there and hear
too.
about stories.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I bet
they told us a few. They're careful not to tell you anything
course.
negative, but they told us a few stories. And then a couple of helicopter pilots and some of the Secret Service told us some stories. They were assigned to the Pope when he came into a New York visit a couple years beforehand, and they were telling us a few stories about dealing with the Pope and taking care of the Pope for a couple of days. So it was a real interesting time. So it was fun. It was a neat deal. It was real cool. And so that was we've just had a lot of those experiences. I can stop and say, David, and I've told you this before.
Yeah, no, I know.
I always want to say this is only because God opens doors.
Right.
God, one of my favorite scriptures is God ordains the steps of a man. How can he understand his way?
Right.
I guarantee you, I have not understood my way most of the time. It's just this door opens.
But God was guiding it, opening up those doors, directing
it just
you wherever you
happens,
needed
and
to
we've
be.
all got a place in life that we're supposed to be
so
fulfilling what God wants us to do. And so this is just all about God for some reason said, Nick Jordan, here you go. Go for it.
Yeah, and I thought another fascinating story that you had was your encounter with Billy Graham, which I thought, man, I would love for our listeners to hear that too. Here's a man that's so well respected across, so many different lines of people just love him. Yeah,
it was awesome. Again at the Mielbach Hotel.
Okay, so because of your tourism industry and the hotel business.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
So I happened to be working with the Billy Graham Crusade team.
Okay.
Which is an amazing operation that people probably don't know all the work that goes into a crusade, all the work that goes on with local churches.
Yeah.
How do you set up all the counselors you need?
Yeah.
Well, it's actually regional because I think people probably come from all over the place. It's usually maybe a 4-state area. People come into a crusade.
See, these are things people don't realize. Yeah, 4 states.
So these guys are working with churches, particularly in Kansas City in this case, because they got to find counselors.
Okay.
Thousands of people are going to come forward and get saved.
Right.
So you got to have people there to counsel them, pray with them, and take care of them. You've got to promotion's the best way I can say it. I mean, they're working with the churches to make sure that you know how to get there, and he's going to be there and all that kind of. So I worked with the team on a lot of logistics. In fact, at the end of the crusade, they asked if I wanted to join the team, and for whatever reason, I said no.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. God had a different plan, I guess. But the neatest thing was getting to know them. One day they said, Nick, we'd really like you to come to our team meeting.
Okay.
And Billy Graham's there. I mean, they're working on the crusade.
Right.
But we'd love you to come give your testimony.
Okay.
So I did. I went down and gave my testimony, which,
Yeah.
Is kind of interesting to give your testimony to Billy Graham.
Right.
You're going, okay, Billy, but I did that. But the neatest thing about that whole experience was one day while they were all in town, I was on the lower level of the Muehlbach with another guy who worked at the Muehlbach. We had meeting rooms down there, which is really where a lot of the Billy Graham team meetings happen. But we had meetings down there, and then there was a door to the outside.
Okay.
And I think it'd be probably out to 12th and Baltimore, somewhere in there.
Okay.
So we're standing down there just talking, not thinking anything. We're just talking business. And all of a sudden, through the side door off the street, all by himself, in walks Billy Graham. What? No entourage,
nobody
nothing,
around him.
Nothing. Just Billy Graham walking through the door.
Really?
And I'll tell you what, he stood there and talked to us, I don't know, 15 minutes or so, just like us right now. He just talked to us like we've been friends forever, just things about the day, and everything, just as great. So all of that to say, the one thing that just really struck me about Billy Graham was his humility.
Really?
I mean,
that was like the thing that you came away with.
Yeah, he was one of the most humble people I think I'd ever met. In fact, I heard a story. I don't know if this is true, but I heard a story. He still likes to go out as street witness once in a while.
Really?
That he went out with some of his friends sometimes and did street witnessing.
Wow. So here's this guy in front of tens of thousands, even up to a
world
million people,
leaders.
right?
I mean,
World
the guy
leaders.
meets with world leaders. He does everything.
Yeah.
One of the most humble people I've ever met in my life.
And here he is. He has that heart for evangelism.
Yeah. The other neat thing to that visit was one morning while he was here, the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce decided to have a breakfast and have Billy Graham be the speaker.
Right.
Well, it's in a ballroom that holds 1,000 people or more, right?
Right.
So I go up just to see how it's going. Well, the ballroom's packed.
Oh, of course.
And so this is all of Kansas City business leaders sitting in a ballroom, and they listen to Billy Graham give the gospel message.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy
who can do that, right? Who can command that kind of
God
exactly.
The man was just a man of God.
Yeah,
he was just
sure.
a phenomenal man of God. If he's living in Bible times, he'd be somewhere chapter. A few words about
chapter
Billy Graham,
something. No question.
I just grew in such respect for him and his team through that little
What
experience.
a great opportunity for you to be able to rub shoulders with him for a little bit. Yeah, so fun.
Absolutely phenomenal. So the funeral and everything really kind of meant something when you did, when you went through that. So it was cool.
Yeah,
it was cool.
I bet. Well, so tell us now a little bit. One of the things that you talked about that I thought was really interesting too was your experience in going to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And you were able to meet the mayor. Is that right? The mayor of Jerusalem. Yeah, and kind of how that all happened because you had worked with Brownback, right?
Right.
Who was the governor here. And
right.
So tell me a little bit about that. Yeah.
Actually, what that was, and Brownback, because of his U.S. Senate years, number one, he knows Netanyahu. He knows a lot of these people personally through all the years. But it was a trade mission is what it was for the state of Kansas. So we went over to talk to...
So you were on official business.
Official business. We spent probably 7 days meeting with CEOs and corporate execs in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
What does Kansas have to do with Tel Aviv and all that? Really?
Number one, we got agriculture is a real good bond between us. They're obviously trying to grow and turn a desert, into crops and stuff. And so water is very important to them. So part of the meetings we had were with companies with water. We went up to a little kibbutz up on the Syrian border. And it was just, if people don't know what a kibbutz is, you usually picture it as just some tin buildings and people living there and work in the field.
That's exactly how I picture it.
Well, so we drive in and it looks like that. It's just tin buildings and they've got you can see acres and acres of all kinds of different things, vineyards and all kinds of stuff. And so we go in to meet with them, and they have developed a drip system to water plants, and they use it obviously in their fields. This company is doing something like $2 billion a year out of this kibbutz. Out of this kibbutz in Israel on the Syrian border.
No way.
It's phenomenal. And we said, boy, this is probably great for Kansas farmers. And they pointed to a guy standing in the wall, and they said, see that guy over there? And we go, yeah. He used to work for K-State, and he now works for us. And you got three or four.
They grabbed him from K-State. Wow.
And they said, now you've got 3 or 4 farmers using our drip system in Kansas. But the neat thing about that trip, too, is we went out in the field to see the drip system. And we're right on the Syrian border. And the mountains are there.
Yeah.
And I looked up, and there was just this huge amount of smoke up on the mountain. And I'm going, what's going on up here, guys? And they said, Hamas is doing something. It doesn't matter. It's just they're just playing around doing something on the mountain. We're going, really? The other neat thing up there, just talking about Israel, other than the business side of it, we did two things. One is the Israeli government gave us 2 bodyguards along with the governor's bodyguards. So we had one in he used to be or was currently Netanyahu's security team, and then we had a sniper out of the Israeli forces that went with us.
This is like I'm listening to somebody who's been on TV or some movie or something like that. It must have been such a surreal experience.
What I tell everybody was, obviously Israel's, as many people, have been on my bucket list forever. I wanted to go to Israel.
Sure.
God just overflowed my bucket. I could tell you so many stories about this trip. But anyway, 2 really interesting things to me about Israel, and then we'll get into Jerusalem. But 2 of the interesting things was they want us to go to the Israeli training camp for the special forces. So we did that. We went there. It was real interesting. Can't tell you anything about it because they told us
you'd have to kill me if they told me.
Well, they actually warned us. They took our phones and everything and said,
really?
we really don't want you to talk about anything we say in this room. So that was cool, but then they took us to a hospital on the Syrian border, which is treating Syrian refugees.
Okay, right.
So
everybody's heard about the Syrian refugees and the crisis that has. Yeah.
Right. So it was really the interesting part of that was one of the rooms they took us would have 4 guys in it.
Okay.
And the hospital room, by the way, in this hospital had 4 walls, no TV, no bathroom. So it was just a room. But it had 4 guys in it, and their legs were certainly shot up, chewed up, something. Okay. They were getting treated for getting pretty. And so the governor talked to him for a while with an interpreter.
Okay.
But as we were leaving, we were walking out. Our 2 Israeli security guys said, "We're pretty sure 2 of those guys were ISIS fighters."
ISIS fighters.
And the reason that's important to us is at the whole hospital, and then we heard this again and again and again through the whole trip through Israel, was in the hospital in particular said, all of these people are God's creation, and we're going to take care of God's creation no matter what.
And this was the perspective of the Israelis that were there.
Yeah.
Wow.
We're just going to take care of it.
I mean, this is stuff you don't hear on the news.
No, you don't.
You don't, because all you hear is conflict and war and revenge and killing and all that. But here they are taking care of these like enemies.
Yeah, they could be enemies. It was just really dynamic to me, and we heard that in Jerusalem too. So. And we went in, when we were in Jerusalem, we stayed at the King David Hotel.
Yeah, okay.
Which down their center hallway, by the way, has actual signatures of all the famous people that have stayed there.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Now that's interesting.
So it's a who's who. And in fact, that hotel was bombed by terrorists, I think in the 40s or 50s. It's just a real famous hotel.
Yeah.
So we kidded the governor. We said, they haven't asked you about your signature yet? You know?
How come you're exactly.
You're not going there. But anyway, on side trips, we did in the late afternoon evenings do side trips. And so when we went up north to Syria, we had a gentleman who does tours for David Barton went with us. And I don't know if you know David Barton.
I'm not sure.
David, I don't know how to describe him. He's written a ton of books.
Okay, so he's an
author,
author,
he usually takes American history.
Okay.
And puts it with Scripture.
Okay,
there's a Bible, actually, Founding Fathers Bible, that he did a lot of commentary in and stuff. And
we'll try to put a link in the description for that, too.
He's
so
a
David
good guy.
Barton. Okay.
So it wasn't him, but it's the guy that always does his tours.
Oh, I got it. Okay.
So we went up north, and you drive down the highway, and they go, see that over there? That's the Mount of Transfiguration. Oh, see that over there? That's where Elijah called down fire. Right. So you're going through all this stuff. Well, then they took us to the Sea of Galilee. And we went into ruins they're digging out of an old synagogue that they know Jesus taught in. Wow. So we toured that archaeology site, and not far from there was where Mary Magdalene lived. Okay. And so they showed us the ruins they're digging out there, which would have been Mary Magdalene's home. Wow. And showed us a spot where they believed Mary Magdalene was healed.
Amazing.
While we were there. So we had that. And then back in Jerusalem, they took us down to what's called the City of David, which is actually an archaeological site. They're digging out David's palace.
Really?
Yeah. And so we toured that archaeological site. And the interesting thing, I'm only saying this because if you're going to Israel, going with the governor is kind of cool. Our guide at the site at the Sea of Galilee was the special envoy of the Vatican to Israel.
No way, really? Okay.
So then when we went up to the City of David, when we were doing it, it's the chief archaeologist that's doing the side.
The main guy that's overseeing this whole thing.
Yeah, is our guy.
And you guys get him as your guy. Yeah.
So they're
slouch.
They're finding bells off the priests' robes.
Really?
They're finding coins. There was coins minted when the Jewish return to Israel.
Yes, okay.
They minted a coin to celebrate their return. They're finding those coins.
No
and in
way.
fact, the Minister of Education, I think it's these two, gave one of them to Sam Brown back when we met with him, gave him one of these coins.
No way.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Wow.
So we toured the city of David. We walked out of there.
Okay.
And this is right below the Temple Mount. I mean, you're looking up at the Temple Mount, the Gold Dome and everything while you're doing this.
Right.
And right next to it, he showed us they're digging out three different civilizations: the Byzantine, the Jewish, and the Roman.
Wow.
So they're got a great dig there. But then another neat thing he took us down and showed us a pool of water.
Okay.
And he goes, this, we believe, is the pool they washed in before they went up to the temple.
Wow, was their cleansing, the ritual
Right.
cleansing that they had to do before
they had to be
go
clean
in?
before they go up, right?
In the temple, yeah.
So you pretty well, the path going down to the pool is pretty obvious. But at the time, now it's open, I think. At the time, he took us into an area which had a locked door on it. Took us into an area which he said Jews, once they washed by law, could not be seen or touched by another Jew or they were unclean. So they had to have another path, they thought, back up to the temple. That would be separate from the one everybody coming down.
Right, because you have all these people that aren't clean.
Right.
And so then they couldn't interact with them.
So they got to go. So he took us up what they believe is the path
Okay.
that the Jews took back up to get to the temple. And when we got up there was kind of a hole, and he said this would have been the entrance to go into the temple.
Wow.
At that time. So that was super cool.
That is, my inner geekness kind of gets, I love this kind of stuff. I mean, this is like fascinating, right? Yeah.
It's, I told my family, I said, I want to go back, and I'm going to find out who those two security guys were and who our guides were. And we're going to get them.
those guys.
I want the same
exactly.
one. But then we went through Old Jerusalem,
Okay.
walked our legs off, which will come in a moment, walked our legs off. A neat little side story there was they wanted us to go into a little shop.
Okay.
Actually, two side stories. One to go into a little shop. So we went into this little shop, and there's a guy that's the picture of a Jewish guy.
Okay.
Gray
got the
beard,
right.
looks like he's about 90 years old,
got
his
the
little
cap on.
cap on
Exactly.
and everything. And there's phylacteries all over,
Okay.
the
little prayer
leather
phylacteries
things that
they have.
everybody
Yeah.
wears
Uh-huh.
all over. This guy is a scribe.
No, really?
His family, his whole history from biblical times, everyone in his family has been a scribe.
Wow.
And he was sitting there
Okay.
getting some phylacteries together for two boys that were going to have a bar mitzvah that weekend.
Wow.
And he's handwriting out scripture to go into the phylactery.
So from
there.
generation to generation to generation,
Always
this
a scribe.
is what they've been. This is what they did.
Yeah,
they
always
grew
a
up
scribe.
knowing what they're
Still a scribe.
amazing.
And the other fun story was
Yeah.
it was on the Sabbath, so some of the shops weren't open in Old Jerusalem, but some of them were. So we took a little break. We're walking in some of the shops to look around, and I had a Chiefs hat on, which is a good thing to
go
have
Chiefs,
on.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I walk into one of the stores with a couple of other guys with us, and this girl goes, "Kansas City Chiefs," and I go,
What? You're like, where am
How do
I?
you know that?
What
She
is
says-
going on?
She said, I just moved from Overland Park.
No way.
About
Overland
4
Park.
or 5 months ago. And she said, all of my friends are here. A bunch of us moved to Jerusalem just a few months ago. And we said, have you ever met the governor? And she said, no. So we went and got Sam and brought him in. And she took pictures so she could text back to her parents, look who I was with today. Wow. I was with the governor of the state today. And you guys didn't get to do that.
That is crazy.
It was really kind of fun.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened, by the way. We met with one of the large pharmaceutical companies in Israel who had put a North American office in Overland Park, Teva, or Teva. You say tomato, I say
whatever.
tomato. Whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
As soon as we walked in, the CEO starts talking to me about one of the Chiefs getting injured in the preseason game the Friday before. And I'm going.
You're like, hold it.
I said,
I'm in Israel. How do you?
I said, how do you like Chiefs? So I'm part of a fantasy football league.
Oh, of course.
And so those are just kind of side stories. Yeah. After we did all of that, we went up to a Jewish study center. And by the way, every guide we had, when we looked at a site, read from the Bible what we were looking at.
Oh, yeah.
They very seldom just gave an editorial comment about it.
They were trying to read from
They really
Scripture.
said, this is what you're looking at.
Yeah, that's neat.
So we stood at the top of this Jewish study center, and you can see basically all of Jerusalem from the top of this building.
Wow.
Here's Mount of Olives, blah, blah, blah. And right below it's the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. So he told us all that, scripturally showed us what we were looking at, all that kind of stuff. And then took us down to a room which has a little short video thing about the Wailing Wall, but that's where you can write out a note. So they gave us paper to write out a note, and then took us out to the Wailing Wall so we could pray at the Wailing Wall. So we prayed at the Wailing Wall, which was cool. I think I put Cross Points Church on my note.
We're there. We're in the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. That's all. I love that.
Along with my daughter's company and all the family and stuff. But but the neat thing was then our guide took the governor and I into a room off to the side of the Wailing Wall, which I didn't know existed.
Right. Okay.
And all of the very conservative Jews were in there. There's just walls and walls of books, which are Jewish law.
Oh my goodness.
Jewish law. And he said these would have been some of the same laws Jesus was learning as he was growing up.
Oh my goodness.
And these guys are in there doing what you normally and reading scripture and studying the word. And then the other neat thing there was an arch of stones above us. And he says, see that arch of stones? We go, yeah. And he says, that is the original bridge into the temple. No. And there's never been a repair work done to it. Wow. It's just exactly like it was.
That's
in the original temple. We just.
Oh yeah.
So the other fun thing,
like living history.
Oh, it was. I'm telling you, it changed me.
Yeah.
It does something to you spiritually.
Oh, I'm sure.
To be there and touch those kind of things and be in those things. The other fun thing is we walk out of there, and it's getting to be a hot day, and we walked all over Old Jerusalem that day.
Right.
And I'm thinking, of course, with the governor, you always get a nice van or something to wear, leather, air conditioning, all that. So I'm thinking, by the way, they had extra security at the Wailing Wall that day because they weren't sure. I think it was some Muslim celebration, so they weren't sure something could happen. So everything's locked off and gated and everything. So I'm thinking, oh God, now we got to walk how many miles back to our van, in this hot weather? No way. They'd pulled the van into where the Wailing Wall was, so we only had to walk a few feet up and get in the van and pull out.
It's nice traveling with the governor, isn't it? If you're going to go and see Jerusalem, that's the way to see it.
Royal treatment.
Wow.
So we also had, I don't know, people listening to the podcast may know who Joel Rosenberg is.
Oh, yes, of course. Right. Okay.
Okay. We had dinner with him.
Okay.
At King David.
Yeah.
He and Sam Brownback are friends again.
Okay, sure.
And we sat out. They had this great deck at the King David Hotel that looked over the old walls of Jerusalem. So it's like a postcard. And so the governor asked me to join him and Joel Rosenberg and the governor's wife for dinner. So we sat and talked. It was the most fascinating thing because Joel was just finishing a book, and I can't remember the title of it now, but it's about a king, a Russian king.
Okay, all right.
He writes everything towards the last days.
Right,
so
right.
How Russia is moving towards the last days scripturally, but he writes fiction.
Right.
And he said, I always got to write fiction because he said, I think I can get some non-believers to read my books if it's good fiction.
Exactly.
And so he was in the midst of writing this book. So we spent the evening talking about international affairs and how Putin and Russia are gaining so much power in the Mideast and trying to take over some of the old Russia, but how much power they're gaining in the Mideast and how that relates to last day scripture and what's going on in the world today. Absolutely fascinating.
I bet you were just like, I bet you were pinching yourself. I can't believe I'm here in this crowd.
Actually, there were a couple other people that had gone with us that were sitting at another table, and they really gave me a hard time.
You got to be at the table, yeah.
And then the last night, just people outside of the cabinet and some of the other great people we met. By the way, the governor, one night at the King David Hotel, the governor, we signed I don't know if treaty is the right word, a pact, or at least with the minister, I think probably quality of the water or agriculture minister.
Okay.
We had a big ceremony, Israeli flag, American flag, Kansas flag, and all that. And they sat at a table. It looked like the president was signing a peace treaty with somebody. Goodness. We did a ceremony one night at King David. But the other thing we got, now my mind just went blank, the last night we were there, which was on the Sabbath, two couples invited us to have dinner with them at their house in Jerusalem. Unbelievable house. They were real estate developers. One was from Chicago, one was from St. Louis. And I guess they go to live in Jerusalem a few months a year. And so they got this magnificent place. So we get there, and they're still at services on the Sabbath. But they come in, we sing, we do all the things you do on the Sabbath and the Jewish folks. And then we have this dinner. But our special guest that night to be with us, this is terrible. I'm doing this, and I can't remember his name.
That's right. He can't remember that. It's okay.
But anyway, he was a Russian Jew who was imprisoned in Russia in the 80s.
Really?
And he's now an internationally known human rights. I mean, he was sitting at a table with us talking about world leaders like David, first names and everything. older now.
Right.
Again, one of the most humble people I've ever met. Ronald Reagan got him free.
Wow.
Ronald Reagan got him out of a Russian prison.
Wow.
And so we got to have dinner and listen to this guy's stories as a Jew. Very, very humble. In fact, he deflected a lot of things. We'd say, it's so neat, you got out and all you did. And he says, actually, my wife. He said, my wife is the one that got Ronald Reagan to get me out. And
wow.
My wife, he just
right.
kept deflecting it on somebody else every time you'd say something to him. Just a real neat guy.
Nick, it's amazing to me all the different opportunities that God has placed before you.
Pretty phenomenal.
And all of the stories that you're able to kind of share and just kind of, these are people that have had significant influence around the world that you've been able to kind of rub shoulders with.
A lot of them still
right?
are very influential in getting things done. So it's cool.
Well, thank you for taking the time to be with us today and share with us a little bit. I really appreciate it. So
sure.
A lot of fun having Nick here with us.
Always
and if you've got any comments or questions for Nick, why don't you go ahead and put those in the comments below, and we'll see if he can't answer some of your questions. So have a fantastic day, and thanks for joining us.